I grew up in New Jersey, town probably very similar to East Aurora. We were about 20 minutes outside of Philadelphia. I had a brother and a sister. They were five. My brother was 5 years older than me. My sister was 7 years older. Mom and dad, typical, really nice household. I mean, so why I joined the military. I played a lot of sports when I was a kid, particularly baseball, basketball, soccer. Why I joined the military was probably because I just didn't think I was. I once got a 27 in French, so it goes to show you how how I took my education in high school.
Yeah.
So my options were I could have gone to community college, but I just decided that I probably would be wasting my time, so I wound up joining the Air Force. I was actually thinking about joining the Marine Corps or the Air Force, and then I looked and I was like, man, the Air Force treats you so much better, so I just decided to join the Air Force. They give you like a better place to live. It's a little bit better, like when you're in the Air Force and you go live in like Army barracks, they give you extra money just because it's like substandard housing according to the Air Force, the Air Force standards. So that's all it was. No, I wasn't even, I had nothing. I guarded planes. I guarded planes and I guarded air bases. I was in the military. It's called there. At the time, it was called security police, but So I never worked on a plane. I walked around plenty of them. That's about it, though. I had actually enlisted my senior year, probably in like around September, October timeframe. So I was in what they call the delayed enlistment program. So I had a year from the time that I enlisted till I actually entered the Air Force, and I entered on September 27th of 1990. But yeah, I had like a year that I was just like in high school while I waited to go, and then I had the whole summer off. What it was like, it's kind of a culture shock. Your first like week or so, you're just adjusting to everything. Somebody's yelling at you, they shave your head, they inject you with a whole bunch of vaccines and stuff. So you just get used to it's a completely different life. But it's actually, if you think about it, it's really simple because you don't have to worry about anything. It's not like here where somebody says you got to go show up to class. Well, somebody's there to wake you up. Somebody's there to do it. So it's just a matter of getting used to somebody being structured, having a structured life, and somebody yelling at you, telling you what you got to do, making sure your bunk is clean and your area is clean and the toilets are clean. I just remember the biggest thing is, and I don't want to get too graphic on this stuff, but I remember like people couldn't, because of the adjustment in your body, people couldn't go to the bathroom for like a week. They would just actually not go to the bathroom for like a week because they just couldn't. No, I'm not saying like they pee, but they couldn't do the other thing, So it was just because your body is so screwed up, and you're eating all this different food and so. But it wasn't hard. Well, Lackland was the training base.
Which is?
In San Antonio, Texas. I spent 6 weeks there for basic training, and then I spent another 5 weeks there, which is the training for being a security policeman. And then after that, I went to Fort Dix for what they call Air Base Ground Defense School, which was where you just learn how to. It's like an Army grunt school. You just learn how to defend a base or defend a fixed position. So I went there for, I think that was 5 weeks, 4 to 5 weeks. And then after that, I was stationed in Grand Forks, North Dakota, which was quite the interesting place. For training, you always got up at like around, I just remember when I went to basic training, it was always 6 a.m., but we always used to get up like a little bit before Reveille went off. So like about 5 minutes before. I remember I couldn't, for a year after, I always got up, like for that, I got up at 6 a.m., like no matter what, my body would just wake me up at that time. It took a while for you to adjust back to normal life once you got out of that routine. But once I got in like Grand Forks, it was different because what was out in Grand Forks is the missile fields, which it's essentially missile silos out in the middle of nowhere in the cornfields and whatever's out there. So we had to go patrol them, and they had sensors on them. Now, I mean, you couldn't get into one of these things you could have dropped, I don't know, conventional bombs on these missile sites, and they couldn't get inside of them. But we had to guard them just in case somebody, figured out how to unlock them and get inside. So it was just these dispersed things, like over 150 miles. So there was several, we would go out there and we'd work for like 3.5 days on, and then come back in and have like 4.5 days off. But you'd go out and live out there in these little barracks out there, and respond to sensors. So it was all different. Like when you'd work 12-hour days. So during that 12-hour day, you'd wake up at like 6 a.m., but you didn't really have to do much of anything because it was just kind of like sitting around waiting for something to happen. You'd have somebody cook your meals and stuff like that. So it wasn't that. Yeah, I worked an extreme variety of stuff while I was in the military. Like I went from Grand Forks was my first base, and I did like a year and 2 months there. And then I was stationed in Kunsan in Korea, which is in South Korea, and it's like I think it was like how far? It was like 4 hours south of Seoul, and it was on the Yellow Sea. And in there, I worked regular shift, and it was just like military police. I would work just patrolling the base, making sure people didn't act like idiots and get drunk, which people are prone to do. But there we would do a lot of, because the Korean Peninsula in the 90s there was a lot of tension back then, so there was a lot of fear of war, so we were constantly having exercises, and we were constantly, doing, learning. It's the first place I ever put on what they call mop gear, which is the chemical weapon gear. So you learn how to, that's interesting stuff. It's just like this charcoal lined gear that if in the middle of summertime you'd sweat your ass off, so gas masks and stuff like that. When I was in Grand Forks, I took a couple college courses, just hang out with my buddy. I was 18 years old, so I was 19 years old at the time, so it wasn't really, there wasn't really a lot to do other than, we would drive up to Canada. I remember going and seeing Winnipeg Jets games. So back when they were the original Winnipeg Jets, it was one of the last years they were there. But I would say it was just like hanging out with the guys. It wasn't like there wasn't a lot to do in Grand Forks, in case you didn't know that. There's the University of North Dakota is there, which is a pretty nice school, but there's not a lot to do there. So like that whole year. So when I first got there, I remember I was like, I got to get out of here. So I went into I went in and you can put in and request assignments, and the easiest way to get out of any place is it said worldwide remote. So it means you go anywhere, and that's why I got stationed in Korea, because they were like, I said, just get me out of here. Because usually when you go on those one-year tours, they'll send you back wherever you want to go. And I wanted to go back, like I came back to Dover Air Force Base after that, which was another adventure in itself. So like I went to Korea and then I come back to Dover. I can't really say that I got a lot of the culture, because Korea was really backwards when I was there. And especially the place where I was. There wasn't really anything right around there to do. So there wasn't, like, it was, I'd been to Seoul, which was a nice city. But there wasn't really, right outside the base there was just dirt poor, and it was just nasty. There was only places to just go out. And I was 20 years old, but in Korea, anybody can drink, so people would go, they'd have bars and stuff, places where the military police patrolled so that the Americans could go down and have fun. But so the most I got from Korean culture was, I remember watching a bunch of Koreans fight each other in the middle of the street. But it really wasn't much. And I had this one, I remember I was on leave for 30 days in January. I flew back to Seoul, and they put me up at a hotel in the middle of Korea. And I didn't speak English, and the guy at the front desk didn't speak Korean, and the guy at the front desk didn't speak English, and I'm like, you got to wake me up, because I had to take a plane from Seoul back to Kunsan, and I'm like, you got to wake me up at 5 a.m. And he didn't. He's like, oh sure, and he just goes away. And I remember that night, I'm like sitting in there, and Koreans are really small, so I was like sitting in this small bathtub, and I was watching Korean basketball. Like I couldn't understand what's going on, but I was watching them play. Everybody knows basketball, so I'm like watching basketball. And I remember that day, the guy's like, I go downstairs, it's like 5 a.m., and I'm like, you didn't wake me up. He's like, oh, and I said, I need a taxi back to the thing. She calls this taxi guy, and this guy comes around, starts up the taxi, and the windows were all frosted over. And I don't know if you've ever been on an Asian city, but Asian cities are insane in the traffic. So there's traffic going everywhere, and this guy, the windows are frosted up. He's got this little hole in his window, like that big, or he's just looking out. And we're just cars and scooters, or everybody's just zipping by, and he's just zipping through the streets. I thought I was going to die that day, but I made it to the airport and flew back. But like that, it's just there was a little bit different, because Korea at the time was not a really like a good place to be. There was a lot of tensions, and there was worried about invasion and all kinds of weird stuff. The North Koreans are a little bit crazy, so. But I didn't really see a lot of Korean culture. I was a military. It was like base patrol, making sure. I remember like I would patrol like the flight line or the housing areas and stuff like that. So, and I got stationed in Dover, and I'm like, oh, I'm close to home, and that's when I just didn't realize the mission of Dover Air Force Base. So I I was there for 2 years, and I spent those 2 years. When I first got there, I remember they come out and they were like, "We need volunteers to go to Somalia to relieve these guys." I was like, "Oh, sure, shit, I'll go." And so they're like, "Okay," they picked out 13 of us and they sent us over there. And I got there and it was like, oh, you remember the movie Black Hawk Down? I got there and like it was like 2 weeks later, and that's all that. Everything broke loose there. I was lucky. I was on the airport at the time, but people don't tell you in the Air Force that, especially back then, the Air Force, they tell you, the Air Force, it's easy and you don't do it. But when I was in Somalia, that was some pretty, because everybody wanted to get on the air base, so it was like just a crazy time of, I never thought I would be doing that in the Air Force. We were doing convoys and watching people just, get shot up, and it was just insane because we had the hospital right there on the airport, and so that's where all the guys came in after they got shot up. So I remember just watching that, going, "Wow, man, it was an interesting time in my life, that's for sure." It was I don't know. It's just it was an experience. It was 2 months that I don't think I'll ever forget. I don't want to remember half of it, but it was interesting. So I mean, you know what? I loved it. I enjoyed it. I had a good. Well, I can't say I had a good time, but it was it made me who I am. So I can't. Yeah. I did a lot of stuff that I never thought I would do while I was there. I was there for 2 months, yeah. And then after that, I came back. God, when was that? I can't remember. But it was like the end of 1993. I came back and I went to back to Dover Air Force Base, and then it was probably like a year or so later. I actually wound up going to. I was sitting at work one day and they just come in. They're like, "We need another 13 people to go to Mombasa, Kenya." And they go, so I'm just sitting there working. I'm like, I don't have to go. And then they're just like, "Oh, hey, you can go." Like they just pulled me off the desk that day. They're like, we'll send you back and you can, pack your stuff and then be ready in like 12 hours. I was like, oh, crap. So, and then, we go, go back. I pack all my stuff. I come back like 12 hours later, get in line, because in the military they have these mobility lines. Back then it was like you would get in line and then they would go and they make sure you have all your shots. So if you had a bunch of shots, you just like go through this line and they're just injecting you, and then you would get in line and then they just load you on a plane and you fly to wherever you're going to go. And I remember I went to Mombasa. So we get there and there's the international airport there that we took over. And we got into Mombasa, and we set up, and it was really nice there. I mean, they had this. I remember it was almost like a food truck come out, and they would cook you burgers, and then we stayed at a hotel, and they had a Hard Rock Cafe in Mombasa. I used to have the T-shirt for it. It was great, So we would sneak down there. We stayed in these really nice hotels. We had to share a room and stuff, but we stayed in these really nice hotels. But we were guarding just the airports, or the airport and the international airport there. So I only stayed there for like 3 weeks, but one time, a buddy of mine and we hopped on a plane, and I remember we flew to, I want to say it was Goma, Zaire. Oh, well, first we flew into Entebbe, Uganda. I don't know if you ever heard of that place. And that was cool because back in the 70s, they had this guy ruled their country called Idi Amin, and he had. There was these I can't remember the name of the group that kidnapped a plane and took it to Entebbe, and they landed on the airport there, and they it was full of Jewish. It was I think it was a air like Israel airliner. Well, anyway, they landed the plane there, and then they took the hostages off, and they were inside the airport. Well, the Israelis flew, and Uganda's in Central Africa, and the Israelis took off, and they flew from Israel in the middle of the night and landed in Entebbe and raided this place and killed all the hostages, or killed all the hijackers, and then they loaded up all the people and flew out. And it was like one of the most amazing raids you'll ever see. And when I got there, we landed on the airport, and you could still see the bullet holes from like, and this was in the 90s, you know, so nobody had fixed the place up in the last 20 years. Nobody had cared. So anyway, then we flew down to like Goma, Zaire, and I just remember like that was another like interesting experience because like just seeing there was I'm pretty sure it was out of Goma, Zaire. There was this river that flowed down, and you could see they were pulling like the bodies of the genocide out of this part of the river. It was just like, and you could just smell it all. It was just such a horrible place. And I went, we went down there just to see what it was like, and it was just like, it was just stuff that I'll never forget. So anyway, I spent about 3 weeks there, and then came back to Dover Air Force Base. So and then Kenya was like Somalia. I stayed on the compound that we had these. It was the Air Force, so like we had air conditioning. They had these old collapsible morgues back in the day, and that's what we stayed in. So like it was different. It was really different because, like in Somalia, we were always armed. You always had your rifle and your pistol, and you were always ready to go. And in Kenya, it was just like we would drive to the airport. We had this bus that took us everywhere. So it was just like a completely different. It was very civilized. I shouldn't say civilized because it really wasn't. It was very. Like I remember we would drive and we would have this bus, we'd have this driver, it was assigned to our little unit there, and he would take us back and forth to the hotel, and then every morning we would drive through, and you could get like English language newspapers, but there'd be kids there, like just roaming the streets, like they were just essentially wild kids running the streets, but I remember one buddy would just throw candy to them like every day, and they loved it, and I'm sure they don't get much candy over there, so, but it was like, so it was a completely different feel to it. It was a different world, Somalia was more. That was a combat zone. I mean, that was fighting. That was people trying to kill you. It was where we sat. We were on a compound. Like we had the air base, and then we had the Air Force compound, and then there would be like the Army compound over here. And then I remember we had these Romanians that were working for the UN. They were next door to us because we used to go over and talk to them all the time. Like I used to trade. We would trade stuff with them. Like we'd give them. I can't remember what we. But I remember one guy gave me like a UN beret, and they were working for the UN, so they'd get a little extra money, so it was good for them. But we didn't work for the UN, so. But it was so it was different. Like Somalia, and then so we had their compound, and then it was surrounded by. Like it was the weirdest like the Egyptian military ran the exterior of the airport, so like they were on the far reaches of the air. So that was another. I hate to keep bouncing back and forth, but remember there was this. We used to go on convoys, and the front gates used to just get packed with people, and so we couldn't get out of the gate. So like all of our Humvees would line up, and we'd watch it. The Egyptians used to have this one guy. He was this big burly dude, and I don't even know what but he had this long stick. It was like a stick you'd beat your horse with or something. And he used to, like, when he used to have to clear the crowd, he would just come out into the crowd by himself with this big stick, and he would just start hitting people. And it was just like the craziest thing I ever saw in my life. I'm just like watching this dude and people would scatter. And then it would clear enough, and then we would all just shoot out the gate, and then drive down our road, and then go to wherever. Like, we'd go to, like, different compounds, like the UN had a compound, or the, what was the other one? There was another one we used to go to. And so we used to have to, go wherever we went to. So. We were all volunteers, so so I don't think that. and I just have to, and I know this is not your fault, but just make sure if you ever call a Marine, don't ever call a Marine a soldier, and don't ever call I was an airman, so she was a sailor. I'm just saying this for your own future, because Marines hate it when you call them soldiers. They'll kill you if you know. It doesn't bother me as much. But like the airmen there, we no nobody. I I would liken it to this. Do you guys ever see this TV show MASH? I don't know if you ever watched MASH. MASH is about Korean doctors and all this stuff. People think that airmen and soldiers and sailors and Marines are all these nothing but professional people that you just go out there and do. But they're just like everybody else. They, they have bars in their thing. They go drinking and having fun, and even in combat zones, people do crazy things. So, like you get tired of it after 2 months. I don't even know how these guys do a year in country nowadays, but after 2 months, I was ready to get out of there. But I wasn't resentful. No, I volunteered for it. I enjoyed it. Kenya was only about a 3-week tour because. No. I was going to say they sent us home for some reason. I can't remember what it was. Spent the rest of the time in Dover, and I volunteered. I wanted to go back. I volunteered for this assignment in Germany, where I was put at the Allied Air Forces in Central Europe Command as they had a headquarters building on Ramstein Air Base, and so like I got assigned there, and I was like a shift commander. I was like a staff sergeant at the time. And so there, it was like the most boring job. We used to sit at night because the building would just be totally locked down. So there'd be 3 of us on at night, and all we would do is watch movies and just like there was just nothing to do. And during the day, we would have to wear a dress uniform and greet because it was a mixed command. So they would have you'd have Dutch airmen, you'd have English. The British Air Force, everybody, the German Air Force was there. Everybody from NATO countries was there. So it was like this huge mix of people. That was really interesting because you get to know, like, I remember I supervised. It was funny because like how it was, I was like 23 at the time, 22. I remember when I first got it on, I was like 22 or 23, and I was supervising there was this Belgian corporal that I was supervising. He was like 43 years old, and I'm like, how could you even? That was his whole life. He was just like I just remember like the different cultures. Like the Belgians didn't like to take showers, or they stunk real bad sometimes, and if they thought it ruined the oils in your skin. So I used to tell them, just you can ruin some oils today. Well, I had to. I worked with them. I worked with the British. Airmen and the Belgian, we had them all over. We had a Dutch guy. We worked all the time. Did a lot of traveling when I was there. I went to Luxembourg. I went to France. Went to like Paris. The Black Forest and stuff. In Germany. So it was interesting. And I got assigned. I actually went to Bosnia for a couple months while I was there, and. You remember that one? You guys were probably still babies in that one too.
Yeah, don't remember it. Know a little bit about it.
That was a massive civil war in the early '90s in former Yugoslavia, and we went like Sarajevo and stuff. That was quiet there. It was not like a Sarajevo. I don't know if you guys remember, but Sarajevo was like the most. During the 90s, all you saw on TV was like people getting shot, walking the street. It was just like there were snipers everywhere. I remember because we went up and we were in the airport, and I went up into the there's a what do they call it? Air traffic control tower, and up there was a sign that it was like, and this thing was just littered with bullets, like the whole entire building. You were surprised it even stood, and it like the one sign said, "This is the most dangerous spot in Sarajevo because it's out in the open, standing building, and you just get shot." I wasn't dangerous when I was there, so I'm not saying that I was some kind of. And that's where it goes back to the MASH thing that I tell you about. It's like that was the craziest place because we had like this on the airport we had like a hospital, and into hospital I remember we had like the med techs and stuff. They would come out and they would just be partying the night before, and then they would come in and the guy would be like, he'd hook up an IV to his arm just to like get his hydration back. They work well for that, they do. So I shouldn't say that, right? It was longer than Kenya. It was a lot longer, but no, nothing compared to Somalia. No, not really. After that, I got back, and then I transferred back here to. I transferred back to MacDill Air Force Base in Florida, and I spent a year down there. And then I said I was tired, so I started going to school full time while I was in the military at night, and then I got out in it was October 24th of 1999. I got out of the military. That was my final day, and then actually my final day was 2 months prior because I was on leave for 2 months, what they call terminal leave, and then I got out. I continued, went to college for a year. I finished up my bachelor's degree. Oh, I'm just blocking your camera. Finished my bachelor's degree, and then I actually went to the police academy down there and at St. Petersburg College, and then I got a job with Indian River County Sheriff's Department, which is on the other coast, and then I worked there for. I got there in October of 2001, and then I left there. Then I was applying for this job here. That I didn't know I was going to come to Buffalo, but I I applied for a federal job, and I 2.5 years later I got the job up here in Buffalo. I'm a special agent with the Department of Homeland Security Investigations. I've been that for the past, it's almost 10 years. 10 years in June. Well, I wouldn't say. I don't have lasting friendships that that are people that I can stay in constant contact with, but I'm not that. I just don't I'm not that type of person. I'm not that type of person that will call you up. Like, I have a good friend from high school that I talk to, but I'm just not that. Like, if it's not now, I just don't. I won't text you just out of the blue like that. So, I had some great friends there. I remember I was actually down. God, it was like 5 years ago. I was in Washington, D.C. on a conference, and I just walked out. I was so bored with it. I just walked out, and I went up. I was walking down this thing, and I went into a convenience store, and I just happened to run into a guy I was stationed with in Germany, and his name was Ryan McCausland, and he was a staff sergeant like me. But now he was like the Air Force OSI. He was like the head of security for the Joint Strike Fighter at the time. But it was just funny that then we were talking for a while, and but it was just funny that I ran into this guy, and just to see all the people, and I was just an enlisted guy, you know what I mean? Like, I was just I wasn't like anybody that was I wasn't some colonel that did all these important projects, or at least they think they're doing something important. I just was this guy, and I have all these friends there, that same as me. They're pretty successful people coming out, so. Like I said, I wouldn't trade it for the world. I had some great, I met some great people, and I did a lot of really cool things, and it probably made me who I am today. It did make me who I am today. Here's what I'll tell you. I don't think I always think that in law enforcement, I think you got to be a little bit street smart. You got to understand how people, because you got to deal with people especially my job, you got to deal with people from all around the world. I mean, you deal with a Jamaican guy one day, and then you deal with Russians, or you'll deal with whatever. But I think that I was always pretty decent at dealing with people. But I got a ton of experience doing that stuff in the military, so it was a great opportunity. It was a great time for me. I would have stayed in. I really would have stayed in, but and at that time, I was determined to stay in, and then I got out, and I was like, ugh. And I became a sheriff's deputy, and I was like, this is fun, but it was okay. And I actually tried to go back in, and then they had, after 9/11, everybody wanted to volunteer, so they were like, well, we don't need you for this, we want to put you in. I was like, I don't want to do that. So I got this job, and I'm so happy I got it. So I don't know that I have anything that I just remember my times in Somalia, and I remember my. I've flown, I never went into all that, because when we were stationed at Dover, we had the C-5 there. I think they got the C-17 now, but the C-5 was the biggest cargo plane in the world. It was the second biggest next to this Russian plane, but was the second biggest cargo plane in the world, so that like we used to fly it everywhere around the world, and I just remember we used to go to all different places all around the world. So I got to travel a lot. I got to see a whole bunch. I mean, one time I think I counted up, and I was like, I'd been to like 103 different countries, or so. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's definitely stuff that I'll never do again. You know what I mean? Like I'll never get a chance to do that again. And it was only because I was in the Air Force that I got to do it, you know. So, I mean, experiences, there were some good experiences, you know. I mean, I met a lot of great people, and I did a lot of cool things, and there were some bad experiences that, I just say bad and just say traumatic experiences, but I don't say that they were bad in the sense that I wouldn't do it again. You know what I'm saying? Like, do I want to go through it again? No, but I would definitely, I mean, I wouldn't trade it for the world, you know. I'm still here. I can't hear well out of my left ear. I got bad vision in my right eye, and a lot of that's due to probably, you know, like my time in the military. All of it's due to my time in the military. It all happened while I was there, but that's just the way it, you know, that's just the way it is. I mean, it's just what happens to you, and I wouldn't want to live a life where I just, if like right now I'm happy. You know what I mean? Like I can live the rest of my life, and what is it? I read somewhere where like it was like Hemingway or something said, you know, a man needs to test himself sometime in his life, and I felt like that. I tested myself, and now I'm a man. Okay, I'm good enough. You know what I mean? Like I don't have to worry about it anymore. So, and not that I ever did, but still, you know, the point is that yeah, the experience was that type of experience. You know. I always tell people I don't worry about, you know, people look at me and they're like, oh, he's so unassuming and stuff, and it's and I don't have to feel like I have to prove myself to somebody. That's what I, you know. Back then, it was weird because I know I talk to these guys nowadays. They can literally Skype. I mean, you could talk like all you want to somebody back home. Back in the day when I was there, I remember we had one phone on the base where you could call, and you had to get like this Mars operator where you would just go there and, you know, and then there was also snail mail. You could send, you know, mail. When I remember Somalia is the best. That's, you know, how we used to have to do it. We'd just go in there and you could wait for the phone to come open, and then you could make a phone call for like 5 minutes back home, and that was it. So I guess, you know, weekly. But it's just something you're used to, you know. You just don't even. That's when you can't talk to somebody as much. Nowadays, you can just. I just keep thinking about. Back then, I remember you go on vacation and you didn't have a cell phone and nobody could contact you. So it'd be like you're just sitting there. Like nowadays, if you drive down the block and you don't have somebody can't call you, it's an emergency. You know, it's so different from the way it was. We were laughing. My oldest son Ryan, he's in college. He just laughs at me because I play with the technology all the time, and he's like, "Oh, you old people." I go, "When I was a kid, I remember. I mean, this is only 30 years ago. I mean, I remember I'd have to pick up the phone, and it still had the rotator. You know, you would say, I don't know if you've ever even seen those phones, probably, and then it would just rotate back. And if you hit the wrong button, you know what I mean? It was just like. And it was so different from the way it is now. It's, you know, like the military now. It's just those guys. Don't get me wrong. I wouldn't want to be in their position. I mean, there's some bad stuff going on in those countries. But I mean, like, geez, my buddy. He was in Iraq, and he's like, yeah. He said his guys were complaining about being over there, and then he looks in his room and he's got a personal TV in his room, and he's got a, you know, PlayStation 4 and all this stuff, and we didn't have any of that stuff. We didn't have so. No, I don't think. Well, you know what was weird about it is, like there was no. In the military, you're accountable for everything. Like if you do something wrong, you know you're going to be held accountable for it. Like we're out here, I know. Like even working as a civilian in the job that I work in. Now I'll tell you this: I get paid much more than I would have ever gotten in the military if I'd made it to the highest rank in an enlisted guy. I got paid more than that, and I work with a bunch of people that sometimes, and I love the guys I work with, but some of them you're just like, they're a bunch of children. And in the military, you could be a child for a little while, but they make you, you know, I mean, you got to be responsible for what happens, because if you don't do something right, people could die from what, you know, what you do. So it's a little, I think that was the biggest difference for me. It's like people were just held accountable that if you did something wrong, you know, you were held to it. It's a different world, that's for sure. I remember I was in Tampa, Florida, and when I was growing up, all I ever wanted to do was be a cop. That was my goal in life. And I think I was 27 at the time, and I was just like, you know what, I'm starting to get up there in age, and I never finished my degree until then. I was like, you know what, I gotta go and do it. So I just decided, and once you get past like the 10-year mark, it's kind of, because 20 years is a retirement, so it's kind of like you feel like you're almost obligated to go. So I figured that was the best time for me to go. So that's kind of why I did it, you know. And looking back, I'm so happy I did. You know, it's been great ever since. I did have the first year out, I was like nervous, and like I said, there was a time that I was going to go back in, but I'm so happy I did what I did.